Hi guys, I got a suggestion to do a playthrough of Stranded: Alien Dawn, and I am absolutely terrible at doing Let's Plays. I cannot overestimate just how bad I am at doing Let's Plays. But I thought that instead what I might do is a hard mode playthrough and turn it into kind of a Let's Play / guide sort of thing. So rather than me just sort of talking as I'm playing the game, I will instead go back over the footage of me playing the game and kind of talk you through the process that I went through for doing it. I decided to go with Emmeline, Ken and Lara. They're kind of like my favourites. And then I added in a wild card of Rita. My first couple of seeds that I got were really bad. What they kept doing was spawning me in a place where it was either there was no room to build or there was just not resources that were viable to go and get. And I really didn't want to mess around with that on a hard mode playthrough. But after a couple of rerolls, I ended up getting this one. And I immediately thought, wow, I was blown away by this. And it wasn't even all the cotton that was around. It was the sheer amount of stone. I haven't really had a chance to play with stone. I've just noticed that in this game, it's a very, very limited resource most of the time. So the option for me to be able to sit down and build with it and really play with it, that was, I want this. I'm having this one. The most important thing though was I need to have access to a couple of resources. The first one was grain, because I was absolutely probably going to need antibiotics at some point. I could get away with just doing bandages, but antibiotics were a plus. Well, a must, I should say. The other thing that I wanted to find was glitter caps, and I ended up finding the mother of all glitter cap spawns. But I also found this really pretty lake that I wanted to build next to. I thought that maybe in the future I might extend the base around it and make some sort of lakeside base with houses or something like that. I don't know. Maybe I'll do that before I end up going to endgame. I'm not sure. But anyway, it was just nice to have the option on the table. But unfortunately, while I was sending people off on the initial explore, I noticed that once I unpaused the game, a couple of bits of debris had fallen right where I wanted to build my base. I actually restarted the map and re-recorded it because I hadn't captured it on video the first time. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to show a little trick that I found. I don't know if anyone else has mentioned this, but I found that you can actually stop that. When you get a really good seed where debris is falling where you don't want it to, you can pause the game and you actually start with scrap unlocked, so you can straight up immediately put down where you want to have your shelters. If you do that, so if you pause the game before any debris falls down, put down your shelters where you want your base to be, it will actually stop the debris falling in that area there. So as you can see here, once I restarted the game, I paused it and I immediately just went and threw down my shelters over there. And once I unpaused it, I didn't have those bits of debris falling right on top of where I wanted my base. This actually ended up being a fantastic area as well for farms. I thought it might be because it was next to water, but it ended up being like 100 growth farms all around there, which is brilliant. Before I sent anyone off to do anything, I wanted to make sure that I had my schedules and activities sorted out. For the schedule, I just went for a 12-hour working day with an 8-hour sleeping with 2 hours of relaxation between work and sleep on both ends. Later on, I did move Emmeline's schedule to a night schedule, and I even shifted it back a little bit once I actually started cooking things. When it comes to the activities, I went with Emmeline as my cook, Ken as my hunter-gatherer, Lara as my constructor and my farmer, and Rita started off being my researcher, and later on she was going to become my crafter. I wanted to make sure that I got all of the research that I absolutely needed done at the start of the game, and that gave me plenty of time to do some crafting. After that, I decided to use Emmeline as a handler and a transporter. One of the things I always do when I play this game is that I kind of neglect that at the start of the game, and it ends up biting me in the arse later on. I end up getting frustrating. So I thought this time I'm going to go with someone who definitely does handling and delivering from the get-go, and it actually worked out pretty well. You'll see it later on. Everything's running fairly smoothly. After all of that was sorted out, I just wanted to fill out the other parts of the activities with just things that would help get the base up and going if no one was doing anything else. So I made sure that delivering and handling was a lower priority than their main activities, And then the other things that would help were a lower priority, I should say, than the handling and the delivering. So basically they'll do what they're supposed to do, and then if they're not doing that, they'll just do a bit of handling and delivering. They've got no handling and delivering to do, they'll go and do things that they're not really specialized to do, or I'm not trying to make them specialize in doing. Once I got all of that done, I sent people off to do a little bit of research or start observing things. I got Ken doing some scavenging, and I got Lara doing the construction of just those first shelters so everyone had somewhere to sleep. I got really lucky with the scavenging, and I managed to get myself a laser pike, so I decided to deal with this problem sooner rather than later. These birdie things don't appear to actually be dangerous, and they don't seem to come after your survivors. But I have noticed that if you've got people drafted, that they will sometimes aggro them, and then that can be a real problem. But if you do go after them when they're asleep, like I did here, you can deal with them pretty easily. They won't be aggressive if you don't sort of encounter them when they're hunting. They're in a big group and they're awake. After everyone had their shelters and the first day was done, my next priority was to set up a kind of makeshift research, cooking and eating area. So I put a couple of shelves in there, and I just restricted them to purely cooked meals and medicines. Everything else went in the stockpiles outside. Later on, I did start storing glitter caps in there. In case you're unaware, the glitter caps will not rot when they're under a roof, so they are really good early game when you don't have access to electricity and a good cool storage. Although I didn't show it in the video, I did restrict them all from eating raw food. I'm not sure if I did it by this point because I am kind of skimming through the footage, but I did do it fairly early in the game. I stopped them all from eating raw food. Something else that I did in this game is I tried to avoid having any sort of potentially rotten food around at all. One thing I have noticed, and it might be purely anecdotal, is that even if they're handling rotten food for example, making animal fats and things like that, that does seem to also set off the gag reflex. Now, I don't know if that's because I'm getting the bug. I mean, when I got the bug before with the vomiting, it wasn't like that. Just everyone was vomiting no matter what. But I found there's situations where I thought I had the bug, but once I stopped people handling those products as well, even if they weren't eating anything nasty, if they were just handling nasty things, that would set off the gag reflex, and then that would set everyone else off because the gag reflex will kind of, if one person vomits, everyone else would get the gag reflex. Once I got those basic amenities done, it was time to set up some defenses. I just built a little sort of wooden fence around the outside of my shelters there, and I just went ahead and threw a sort of zigzag pattern on the front with some traps. This was really just in like a worst case scenario. If I've got big creatures coming in, I can draw them into that. I actually made a conscious decision in this to be proactive whenever I got some sort of attack. So if it was anything that wasn't particularly ranged, or I knew that I would be able to quite easily kite them with a little bit of micromanagement, I decided to go and do that, because that, to me, I found is far more effective until you have a really good defense up in stopping your people from getting hurt. Later on, you will see that I specifically go out of my way to kite them. The other reason that I didn't want to go for a major sort of trap setup was that in a hard mode game, the numbers scale super quickly, so I was specifically beelining towards having flamethrowers. Traps are fantastic if you're dealing with small numbers of enemies, like even say mid numbers of enemies, up to like sort of the 50 mark. They're great, but once you start getting into the hundreds, you do need so many traps that it doesn't really become effective to deal with them. Whereas if you combine the traps with some of the flamethrowers, you can actually make the flamethrowers far more effective, because if you put some traps in front of the flamethrowers, when the first sort of stragglers come in, they'll hit the traps and everything will bunch up behind them, and you'll be able to take out like a stack of 100 creatures really easily with just a couple of flamethrowers. When you double up those flamethrowers, it makes the early game so much easier. The next couple of days was spent with me just getting some plant research done so I could get down my most important farms, which I thought were cloth and glitter caps. And then I started doing research on the absolutely needed technology. So that was obviously construction, forging, weapon crafting and tailoring. I was also planning to try and get electricity done so that in the winter I could cook, have light and have heat without any need for people to do handling and go and collect things. I knew this was going to push it quite close to me actually being able to get clothes done in time, and it was close, but I managed to get it done. You'll see it later on in the video. The actual building, I wanted to build differently to what I normally do and try and see how much better it was. Normally I would build a big room and just have everyone sleep in there and then convert that into the kitchen later on once I had the bedrooms. This time I wanted to go for a sort of symmetrical bedroom and easy to expand layout. So I built 4x4 rooms, even though I know they're not the most efficient if you're just going for the +9 bonus. I just like the way they look. I connected them with a corridor and then built a room off of that, and that meant that I had the central room as wide as I needed it for my kitchen, like the way I like to set up my kitchen. That allowed me to then expand later on a sort of rec room off of that. And if I needed any more rooms, I could just literally mirror that on the other side. It did seem to go pretty well with getting them that bonus early on rather than trying to get the big building done. I will say it is important to micromanage your collection early in the game and also micromanage the building. So once you've got the building laid out, only have your builder doing one thing at a time and do that as you know you've collected the resources. Otherwise, they're just going to go back and forth, and it's not going to get done particularly well. I also offset the main room a little bit just so that I could later on build a platform. That would mean that I could keep all of the resources under a roof right next to the base, and that would allow people to just go in and out during the winter without having to walk for ages to collect things. In addition, with the electricity that I was going for, it would just hopefully make any sort of hypothermia issues much less of a problem in the winter. Well, as soon as I got access to forged metal and I had my main building done, I decided I was going to beeline for flamethrower technology, which I did. And then once I had that, I started beelining then for my ability to set up an electrical grid. The reason I went for this was that even though I knew I was going to be quite late in the game when I started actually crafting things, it did mean that no one was going to have to be outside to repair all those traps, or there would be some traps, but it wouldn't be many to do. And it did mean that if I did get a hypothermia issue, I could just go and have people stand next to heaters and there wouldn't be a problem. I will say though, I did build this wall pretty damn big. It did end up being fantastic, but I probably spent a little bit too long doing this at the start of the game, and it did push my crafting quite late back. You'll see later on. While I was in the process of building the main wall, I did get attacked by I had an event of the hungry pests, and it was the little mantis things. I will say that if you do encounter these guys as an attack, especially early game, be really careful. They can do a really nasty bleed on people. And I have lost survivors in the past being a bit blasé about it. But when it's actually the hungry pests, you can usually get away without aggroing them at all just by setting them, like going out and setting them to hunt. You can manually go after them, but eventually I just get bored and go, screw it. I'm just going to set them all to hunt, and I'll let him do it, and he'll do it over the course of a day. You can see from this video as well that I haven't bothered to fence in my farms at the start of the game. It is something that I will work on later on, but I just didn't think it was worth the time investment when I was specifically trying to get electricity and the wall up and going so that everything would be better during the winter. I will admit that I did have an oh crap moment when I realised that it started to get to 0 degrees outside and I hadn't even started crafting coats and I hadn't got my electricity up. I thought, this is not going to go well. So what I did was set up the crafting table ASAP, and I got Rita crafting coats as quickly as possible, and then I got everyone else really concentrating on the electricity. I kind of mismanaged my resources here a little bit. I hadn't been keeping an eye on how much scrap metal because I'd set my forges to keep 150 metal going, so I did have to also scramble to get Ken to do some scavenging at this point here. As you can see, I was really scrambling to get that done in time, and it was very close. Like, it was starting to get to negative temperatures inside the house. People had really low clothing levels. Like, the clothing were ready to go, and I didn't have any coats done for them. Didn't have any winter clothes, and I thought, oh yeah, nice work, Whammy. But actually, because I had taken the time to make sure that Emmeline was doing all the moving of items and handling things at the start of the game, I actually had a lot of the stuff on hand and nearby, so it didn't take as long as it normally would. So I even though this was probably bad time management here, I probably should have gone for this, a little bit sooner. I don't think it actually turned out that badly. I did have some hypothermia issues later on in the game, but yeah, apart from that, it was very minor compared to what I normally have, where if I've just got the regular old heaters around and I've just got the wooden torches and I've got a cooking stove rather than an electric stove, that is actually far more of a problem later on than the small amount of problems that this caused by taking a long time to start with the coat crafting. Because you see, we're on day 30 and yeah, I still hadn't got the coat crafting started really. What you can see here is that I set up this little sort of crafting area right next to the base. It took a little while for Emmeline to get everything moved over there in between the cooking duties, but it wasn't too far for her to travel. I made sure that she was okay for the hypothermia for the most part. We did have an extreme winter later on, but that just meant that everyone could, like Rita and Emmeline, even though Emmeline was doing the collecting of stuff, the majority of her time was spent indoors, and the majority of Rita's time was spent indoors. That did allow me to really concentrate on getting Ken and Lara up to the point where they could survive the cold temperatures outside. And Rita and Emmeline, Emmeline not going and transporting things wasn't so much of a biggie. And Rita had no reason to really leave the base, apart from to step outside to grab a few things from the shelves and come back in. It also allowed me to keep my meals close by and in a freezing environment once it got really cold, so they lasted for a lot longer, so I didn't need to worry about fridges or freezers, although I did have access to fridges at this point. I did actually get an attack from those flying animals at this point in the game, and a lot of people have on my turrets video talked about how dangerous the flying creatures are, and what I wanted to show you at this point here was that you can deal with them and kite them and micromanage dealing with them with just a single survivor. They do behave in exactly the same way as the other animals in that you can actually outrun them and you can get far enough away that they stop attacking you. They are a ranged attack, so you do have to be careful with that. You can't use any survivor that doesn't have ranged with them. But what you can do is you can kind of just go up close to them. You can aggro them, and if you get too many of them aggroing, you can just run away. And you see that they don't move that fast when you do it this way, and then eventually they will lose they'll lose aggression, and you can just come in and deal with them. When it's a small pack of them like this, it's actually really easy to handle them. You don't have to let them come into you. And I would actually say, like, even up to, I don't know, 40 or 50 of them, you can probably deal with them with a single survivor who's got high combat. Obviously, you do want to have a nice weapon like a pistol, something like that. But even if you just had a bow, you could probably micromanage them with a couple of survivors that have a bow up to about that 40 or 50 mark. So it just wanted to demonstrate like how much that being proactive with dealing with the creatures really can just make your life easier rather than always letting them come towards you. Later on, obviously, it's like when you get really high numbers of these guys, you want to have turrets and you want to have something to hide underneath so they can't get too close to you. But yeah, early in the game, you can just deal with creatures like that without a problem. I will say that the spiked creatures, the scorpions, they're a different matter. They're quite nasty. And I would say that if you have access to pulling them into traps, that's always a good idea. Just in the situation with the flamethrowers, draw them close and then run right back into the base, and they should run into the flamethrowers. And if they do get trapped, you can send people out with spears to like do some damage on them. But you really do have to be careful with those ones. They do quite a nasty bleed attack on you. With regards to the trap and flamethrower situation, I really just wanted to demonstrate this here. So I was starting to get up to the point where I was having quite a large number of creatures coming in to attack the base. And those traps really do play very nicely with the flamethrowers. But as you can see, that where traps wouldn't scale particularly well, the flamethrowers do a lot of damage, but the traps with the flamethrowers, they're fantastic. Like they really do make your life so much easier. And if you've got a double set of flamethrowers, which I do eventually set up, not in this video, but later on I set up a double set of flamethrowers, you can deal with very large numbers of creatures without ever having to need to worry about turrets. I did end up getting a fairly extreme cold snap during the early part of the winter, so what I did was moved my heaters right over close to the bed. Probably not in the ideal situation in the far two rooms, but in the closest two rooms, I put the heaters right there next to the bed. Because of the way that the heating works in this game, where it's like a local area to the heater will have far more heat, this means that if people were getting extreme hypothermia, and a few people did get extreme hypothermia, I would just send them to their bed, and even if the rest of the room was freezing cold, it still allowed me to get their body temperature up just by sending them to sleep. Now, as an example here, as you can see that Emmeline got extreme hypothermia here, so I just grabbed her, told her to go to her bed, and just by going to the bed and being right next to that heater, it actually dealt with her extreme hypothermia really easily. I hadn't got many clothes set up by this point, but what I did start doing was just giving everyone who was out and about, I gave them a coat and a hat, and then when everyone had a coat and a hat, I started trading over their clothes into more either newer clothes or better clothes than what they already had. So some people do start with boots that give them a negative, or they don't give them any cold resistance almost, and some of the coats give them a negative cold resistance when they first get them. So I just started prioritizing trading those out. But actually having the electric heaters and having them right next to the bed, that really minimized that problem, as long as I had a couple of survivors that I could send out and about. And I did manage to get some nice pieces of synthetic armor to give to Lara and to Ken, which meant that they could survive much colder temperatures. The rest of it really was quite a non-issue, to be honest. It was far less of an issue than I thought it was going to be. So at that point there, that was kind of the turning point where I knew that I'd got through the worst of it, because once the cold snap finished, everyone was starting to get in clothes that gave them a cold tolerance above, minus temperatures. So that really wasn't much of an issue. I started to get a few CPUs here and there from the scavenging. No one was getting uncontrollable hypothermia. No one was vomiting. I had access to antibiotics. I had access to medicines. I had a decent defense up. I was actually really quite happy how the start of this game went. So I'm going to end the video here, and what I'll do in the next video is show you me expanding the base out and kind of like a setup that I was enjoying. I do have on the research for this one the graphite panels, which is quite nice. I'm going to aim for getting the carbon armor. Ideally, it would be quite nice for me to get hold of the printing components from some sort of research. But the next video is really me expanding out the defense, getting a crafting area done, and also sending Ken off on some expeditions to see what sort of stuff I can get. But I hope you guys found this useful, and I hope you enjoyed it. As I said, I'm not good at doing Let's Plays, but hopefully this sort of guide, Let's Play, talky sort of thing was enjoyable for you to watch, and maybe it helped you if you've been having trouble with your playthroughs. Have fun, guys. Catch you all soon.